Welcome back to First Team Fantasy Podcast. It's your boy Derek. I'm here with Schiff as always.
Yo.
We're going to be covering the Sunday morning games. In this episode, we'll be releasing another episode where we cover the afternoon games along with the Sunday night and provide an injury report. To kick it off, we have the Minnesota Vikings. They traveled to Charlotte, North Carolina to play the Panthers and won kind of an ugly game, 21-13. Kirk Cousins, what we haven't seen the Vikings be able to do is run the ball successfully, and we kind of saw that this game along with their defense playing pretty stout. Kirk Cousins was 12 of 19 for 139 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He only had 11 and a half fantasy points, but with him only throwing the ball 19 times, we're used to 30 plus attempts from Kirk, so that was kind of a weird week on that end. Justin
Yeah, it was a bit
Jefferson.
of an outlier.
Yeah, we're not going to see that too often. I mean, maybe now with Cam Akers in the mix, they can get some more success. But from the receiving end, our only real player was Justin Jefferson. He had 6 catches on 9 targets, 85 yards, 2 touchdowns, 26.5 points. Another great week for Jettas. Um, Jordan Addison was out there 58% of snaps. It's the first game we've seen him goose egg as a rookie. He only had 1 target as well. So coming into this game, I'm sure a lot of people were, you're starting Jordan Addison, and I would have told you to start him coming into this game, but he definitely had a rough week. The same KJ Osborne. He played 83% of snaps, only saw 2 targets for a catch and 16 yards, 2.6 fantasy points. The big one that I was kind of shocked to see was TJ Hawkinson. He only got 3 targets, 2 catches, 24 yards, 4.4 points. And we've seen him since he joined the Vikings really be that number 2 behind Jettas. And I guess technically he was still in the passing game, but that's a week you're not going to see very much from Hawkinson. A 4-point week. I mean, you can expect normally low double digits at the least, just from the volume he's getting. The
Yeah, I mean, this was a week you saw Kirk Cousins turn the ball over 3 times.
mhm.
Anytime you turn the ball over that many times, you're going to be a lot more limited on offense. And they threw the ball 19 times and ran it 23 times.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and segueing to their running game, Madison actually had a very solid game, very efficient game on the ground. 17 carries, 95 yards. He only had 1 catch for 3 yards on 1 target, 10.8 fantasy points. But from where you drafted Madison, honestly, 10.8, it's a very solid week, especially for not getting in the end zone. At least from what we've seen from him this season, he played
and he
69% of
didn't
the
fumble.
snaps. No, he did not fumble. And we were wondering if we would see Cam Akers this game, and we did. He played 29% of the snaps. He had 5 carries for 40 yards, 2 receptions for 11 yards on 2 targets, 7.1 fantasy points. And I mean, if you're a Madison owner, Akers can help him because he alleviates a little bit, and it's not just Madison having to do everything. But at the same time, Cam Akers actually looked pretty good. And he might cut into that backfield a little more than people thought initially he would. I mean, I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it might end up being a little more like 60-40 every week.
Mm-hmm.
And if Cam Akers starts looking better, they're going to go with the better running back. I mean, they traded for him for a reason. If Madison's not getting the job done, and I mean, they gave him he ran the ball 17 times on Sunday, so you still like that volume, and he was able to get a 17-yard run. So you like to see that. He's been getting stopped at the line of scrimmage a lot, so that's been pretty frustrating. But I think this is going to be a backfield where you're dealing with 2 ball carriers, and kind of like if you're a Jahmyr Gibbs owner with David Montgomery there, this is going to be something that you're just going to have to deal with for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and Cam Akers owners, you can breathe a little bit of fresh air because where you drafted him and how he was used in LA, if you did not drop him, you're absolutely holding him now because it seems
Yeah.
like he can play a bit of a vital part in a pretty heavy powered offense as well.
Well, yeah, he
Uh,
definitely has value. And then if Madison ever were to go down, or if they decide to elevate him to the running back one, then he gains a lot more value, like you said, in a high-powered offense on most weeks.
yeah, that's true on most weeks. This was one of those weeks where their offense kind of sputtered a bit, but I mean, they still did get it done. On the other side of the ball, for the Panthers,
I mean,
Bryce
I
Young.
think Carolina's defense might be a little better than we give it credit for.
Yeah, no,
So,
I 100% agree with that. I mean, they've kept them in some games. Like they lost to the Saints, but it was an ugly game. They lose to the Vikings here, but hold them to 21. I mean, if their offense could get a little bit more going, especially against a
yeah.
Vikings defense. But yeah, absolutely. I think Carolina's defensive side of the ball is a lot better than the offensive side of the ball, and better than, yeah, people thought they would be as well. Um, Bryce Young, 25 completions on 32 attempts, 204 yards, no touchdowns, 7 fantasy points. I mean, obviously he's not a guy we're starting. Miles Sanders came into the game banged up. He had that groin injury that he was dealing with. He saw 13 carries for only 19 yards. He had 3 receptions for 13 yards on 3 targets, finished with 6.2 fantasy points, only 43% of the snaps. And this was a game where we'd mentioned, we may see more Chuba Hubbard because of Miles Sanders dealing with that groin injury, and that is exactly what we saw. It's the first time Chuba Hubbard out snaps percentage Miles Sanders. He had 54% of the
Yeah.
snaps. He had 14 carries for 41 yards, 2 receptions for 12 on 2 targets, 7.3 fantasy points. If you're a Miles Sanders owner and you started him, obviously it was a disappointing week. If you decided to make the pivot to Chuba, you're
It was a disappointing
it
week.
was a disappointing week because Miles still played, a decent amount. Really, the only guy that has proven himself to be a very solid starter is Adam Thielen. He once again 7 catches, 76 yards on 8 targets, finished 15.2 fantasy points. And I'll be the first to admit I'm kind of shocked at how productive Adam Thielen has been this year. He has reemerged as a wide receiver one. Um, and
Yeah.
he's
They're
become a
also
guy that you
looking to
start.
trade for a wide receiver. That's
Yeah.
been so. I just keep myself aware of that if you have Adam Thielen in an important position, because if they were to trade for a better receiver, you're going to see those targets go down.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Jonathan Mingo missing this week, we saw Terrace Marshall get a pretty big up
Out of
spike.
nowhere.
And he had it last week. He had 8 targets last week. He finished this week with 10 targets.
Yeah, that was with
Nine.
Andy Dalton throwing the ball damn near 60 times, though. So
Yeah, but then
there's no surprise.
no, absolutely. And I mean, but we saw it this week. He had 9 catches, 56 yards on 10 targets, 63% snap count, 14.6 fantasy points. He's kind of a weird one. Anyone other than Adam Thielen in that passing offense, I'm just super hesitant. Like, Terrace Marshall may have a couple good weeks. Mingo comes back next week. And then it's, who's really the number 2 there? It's probably going to be Mingo. But he's definitely a guy to keep your eye on. Terrace Marshall's had a couple productive weeks. For the other ones, DJ Chark had a couple explosive weeks, and then we see weeks like this where we're reminded why we don't start him. He had 3 targets.
Yeah.
Laviska Chenault was also out there, kind of just running cardio. Both of them had a pretty quiet week. Nothing really to note there. And I mean, that's really it fantasy wise from the Panthers. You have an Adam Thielen that you're starting. You have a Miles Sanders who you're probably starting, but you want to monitor that groin injury. If you have someone else that's going to get, that's fully healthy and is getting more volume than Miles is getting currently, I'd roll
Yeah.
that way. But his groin injury is definitely something to monitor. If he can get a full week of practice in and get back to healthy, I mean, you're still starting Miles Sanders.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as the receivers, I said I liked DJ Chark if Andy Dalton was playing, which he wasn't. So you see, Chark, Chenault, Hurst. Miles Sanders got 3 targets, which is more than you, if Bryce Young is in, the running backs are going to get more targets than like Chark, and I don't know how much I like Mingo if Young is the quarterback. Maybe throughout the season they develop some rapport, but also really watching if they trade for somebody, because then that just destroys Mingo's value for this year, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's about it. I mean, this isn't an offense I'm too excited about as it is.
Yeah.
So
100% agree.
But that one takes us over the pond to the Jags-Falcons game that I had to wake up at 6:30 in the morning to watch.
Sorry about that.
And I don't know, what I took away from this is Desmond Ritter's probably the worst quarterback in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
And Kyle Pitts is definitely a guy you can drop at this point.
Yeah.
That was a sad display of football aside from Bijan Robinson on the offensive side of the Falcons. The Jags, Trevor Lawrence looked a little better. I mean, they got up and didn't really have to pass the ball as much. They scored early, and the Falcons couldn't really do too much. So, when there's no need to pass, they're not going to. Travis Etienne ran the ball 20 times, but only got 55 yards. I expected him to do a lot better. I expected the passing to kind of be stifled because the Falcons do have a good pass defense. But it seemed that A.J. Terrell was on Calvin Ridley most of the day. Calvin Ridley only had 2 catches. One of them happened to be for a touchdown. So if you started him, you weren't totally depressed. But this is another week where his volume is just down, and we're seeing everything go to Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram. I mean, right now, especially, I don't know what's going on with Zay Jones, how long he's going to be out for, but this is the second week in a row that he's missed, and we've seen Christian Kirk just eat. He got 12 targets again, 8 catches for 84 yards. I mean, in a PPR setting, Christian Kirk is an every week starter right now until I see otherwise. Maybe when Zay Jones comes back, it changes things. But one guy that I'm continuing to roll with is Evan Ingram. Without a doubt, he has not given us a week that's not great among tight ends. I mean, 12.9 PPR points this week, another week with 8 targets, 7 catches for 59 yards. He's Trevor Lawrence's go-to guy outside of Christian Kirk, but their targets are kind of different. Evan Ingram kind of sits in that intermediate area, and Kirk's targets vary. But Calvin Ridley, I'm kind of worried about, honestly. I just don't know. Outside of that first half from that first game, I mean, maybe it was just because A.J. Terrell was locking him up, but we're not seeing the production that we drafted him for by any means.
Yeah,
and then Etienne. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Calvin Ridley, the main reason I avoided him in drafts is only because where he was being drafted, he was away from football for so long, and he was being drafted ahead of, a Deebo Samuel, a DK Metcalf. He was at the upper edge of, I'd say, kind of like that tier 3 receiver. And just for how long he'd been gone, I know people expected Lawrence to take that big step forward. But like Schiff said, outside of week 1, Lawrence has kind of gone back to his reliable targets, the Christian Kirk, the Evan Ingram. And when Zay Jones comes back, at this point, does that hurt Christian Kirk or does that hurt Calvin Ridley? Because Christian Kirk's been super reliable for him. And I mean, Calvin Ridley...
He's doing the same thing that we saw him do last year, which is why it was so surprising to see their ADPs be so far apart. Because, Christian Kirk was a top 24 wide receiver last year. And he fell super far. So, I mean, and outside of one bad week, he's been super consistent.
Mm-hmm.
I think it might remain that way. Etienne had another week that did not look great, and they play the Bills next week, who, I mean, Achane just had 101 yards on 8 carries against them, so there's that, but I'm not excited about starting ETN next week, especially after he got, like I said, 55 yards on 20 carries. That's just not what we're going for. He got 3 catches for 17 yards, which was a little redeeming. But I don't know. ETN, another really high draft pick. We've seen him get it done this year, but I don't know.
Yeah.
The Jags offense is just kind of in a lull right now, and kind of just hoping to see them get better. But, you had another kind of mediocre week for Lawrence. It looked 23 for 30, 207 yards, only 1 touchdown, but he ran 8 times for 42 yards, which that if he continues to do that and can also start throwing more touchdowns, Trevor Lawrence is going to be a great quarterback to have in fantasy because, I mean, he's very athletic, and the more he runs, I think, it opens it up a little bit more. But right
It's
now
tough going in to play Buffalo after a couple tough weeks.
Yeah, that's one I might pivot to another guy on and just bench T-Law for that week. But that depends on who's available in your league.
Yeah.
And we'll go over that later in the week, though. Like I said, on the Falcons side of the ball, Desmond Ridder was terrible. I mean, absolutely terrible. He damn near threw 2 pick sixes in a row. He cannot, and it's funny because when you watch the Falcons play, Kyle Pitts is out there like a head and neck taller than every other guy on the field. Yet somehow, Ridder overthrows him every time without fail. I mean, he's having to fully extend every time. It doesn't make sense. The targets to Kyle Pitts are just ridiculously bad, and he's just not startable for that reason right now. Drake London is a super touchdown dependent, boom or bust, like wide receiver 3 flex guy. And even then, like, it's rough because Ridder is just so bad. It brings down. If at some point they move on to Taylor Heineke, we've seen Taylor Heineke get it done for Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. So then I'm a lot more comfortable starting the pass catchers, and hopefully they transition to him given how bad Ridder's been. But as of right now, I'm not Okay. For some reason, the one guy he can throw the ball to is Jonnu Smith. And I don't get it. I really don't. But it's funny because all year, Kyle Pitts has 121 receiving yards. This game, Jonnu Smith had 96. I don't know. Nothing on this Falcons offense, aside from the one bright spot in a horrible, it's disgusting, is Bijan Robinson. He's the only guy that I like. He's going to finish as an RB1 on the year. He scored 18.7 PPR points without a touchdown. He hasn't scored a touchdown yet this year. Yet. And when he does, it's going to be a big week. I mean, the guy had 14 carries for 105 yards, 5 catches for 32. He's the only guy outside of Jonnu Smith that Ridder can seem to get the ball to. And then when he gets the ball in his hands, he just makes magic happen. The guy is incredible. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, Bijan's the only guy that I like starting on the Falcons, honestly, at this point. For some reason, Arthur Smith still decides to put Tyler Algier on the field. Oh, that limits him a little bit, but he's getting worked out every week. He's getting less carries, so you do like to see that. And then as far as this game, that's really all I have. It was disgusting from the side of the Falcons outside of Bijan. The Jags, look, they scored early and scored on defense, so they didn't have to do too much. Next week, it's going to be tough for them.
Yeah, the Falcons, like Schiff said, your really only play is Bijan. I know we're coming up to our first week of buys, and there's a good amount of receivers that do have this week 5 bye. So if you have Drake London and you're obviously, you have a couple guys on bye and you have to throw them in as that wide receiver 3 or flex, pray for the touchdown, Because if it does not come, more than likely it's a bust week. If it does come, you're going to get a decent week from him and not hate it.
Yeah, you're going to want to pay close attention to the waiver wire episode this week.
Yeah, there may be better plays on the waiver wire, and we'll cover Jonnu Smith on that waiver as well, because right now he's a better fantasy play than Kyle Pitts. That's crazy to say, especially in 2023 with Jonnu getting up there in age, but that's just how it's been. Jonnu's been getting the targets, but again, we'll cover that once we're going over the waiver and things like that. But yeah, the Falcons offense outside of Bijan is something I stay away from.
Yeah, Arthur Smith and Desmond Ridder are war criminals.
Yeah. And that segues us to our next game, and two offenses at this point, other than a couple players that crazy to say, I want to stay away from. And that's the Bengals traveled to Tennessee to play the Titans, and they got annihilated. The Titans beat them 27-3. Joe Burrow, and I'm a Joe Burrow owner, and I've already said, I promise you I will not be starting Joe Burrow next week. I don't care. I am not starting Joe Burrow. I will pick up a Brock Purdy, a Russell Wilson, and I will throw them in my lineup until Joe Burrow shows me that he remembers how to play football. He is the highest paid player in the NFL, and he has been playing, I want to say terrible. For Joe Burrow standards, he is playing terrible.
It's senseless because in training camp, it comes out he might go on IR because he hurt the calf. And then it's like, oh no, he's going to play. He's going to be all right. He's not all right. They should have put him on IR through the first 4 weeks because now they're 1-3. T. Higgins is hurt. I don't care if he plays or not. He's got a fractured rib. If you play with that, people are going to hit you in your ribs, and it may or may not get worse. But a hobbled Joe Burrow out there is just not making any sense to me. And it's very clear. Everything is quick hitting stuff. They're not really going down the field much at all. When he can't scramble, if he has no time to move around, he's throwing it away. You're seeing a lot of super inaccurate passes that and it's because of the calf. And they're clearly they lose to the Ravens, and he's dealing with the calf. We'll see if he's going to play next week. And then they play the Rams last week. No, they played the Rams last week.
Oh yeah,
they go out and win. And then throughout the week, he's off the injury report. He's good to go. And then they play this game against the Titans, and he looks the damn same that he looked against the Ravens and the Browns. It does not make sense to me. I don't get what's going on in that organization. He's worth too much money to just be putting out there if he's hurt. And yeah, you're not going to see much production outside of the short, whatever Jamar Chase gets. It's because he's making it happen, because it's going to be close to the line of scrimmage. Not looking good right now.
Yeah, and completion-wise, Joe Burrow had a decent game. He was 20 of 30, but he only threw 165 yards. 4.7 fantasy points. Another horrible week for Joe Burrow. And guys, you're drafting him 4th, 5th round, expecting Joe Burrow stats, and they just have not come. And it's hurt the offense as a whole. Jamar has started to pick it up a bit, but again, he's not throwing touchdowns. So those fantasy points you're expecting from Jamar, Joe Mixon out the backfield, T. Higgins, even Tyler Boyd, they're just not coming because the offense can't generate touchdowns. I mean, Jamar's the only receiver that finished with a solid fantasy day. He had 7 catches, 73 yards, 9 targets, 14.3 fantasy points. Yeah, half PPR, that's hurting.
Half PPR, this whole team is killing you right now.
Yeah, they're scoring no points, but full PPR Jamar had a decent day. T. Higgins played 51% of snaps before getting that rib injury. It's a rib fracture. T himself said he hopes to play this week. I don't see it happening. But we'll see as we get closer to the weekend. But as Schiff mentioned, playing with a rib fracture doesn't seem like the greatest idea because you get hit in those ribs and it just gets worse. But he played 51% of snaps, had 4 targets, only caught 2 of them for 19 yards, 3.9 points. Terrible week for T. Higgins. Tyler Boyd's the guy who's going to see the up spike if T. Higgins does miss time. He saw 7 targets this week, 4 catches, 26 yards for 6.6 points. He was out there 91% of the time, and if T does miss time, expect Boyd to be out there 90 something percent of the time. But if Burrow doesn't, if he's not healing fully because he's practicing and he's playing in these games, I mean, that's why I said I'm not going to start Burrow until I see a good game from him, because who knows how long this stretch continues if they keep rolling Burrow out there. And I mean, the receivers especially, outside of Jamar, who's starting to get it going. But even Jamar, we heard him after the game. I don't want to repeat what he said, but he is always open. Jamar is always
He's
open.
always up and open.
He is always open. And I mean, that's really not a good sign to see Jamar kind of throwing that shot at Joe Burrow. I mean, it just has not looked good. Even Joe.
This organization is just not well managed right now.
No, it is not. And even Joe Mixon didn't have a very good game. He had 14 carries for 67 yards, and we expected this. The Titans have a very good rush defense. That's why again, if you're a Joe Burrow owner, that's why we're saying, oh, he's got to get the ball through the air, right? The Titans have a really good run defense. Their pass defense isn't as nearly as good as the rush, so they're going to have to pass it. They couldn't do it. And,
I mean, the past 3 weeks, the Titans defense had given up over 100 yards to each team's number one wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great trend.
And Jamar couldn't even get it done, and he's always open. So Joe Mixon, he had 67 yards on the ground, 1 catch on 1 target for 9 yards, played 80% of the snaps, finished with 8.6 points. I mean, a Bengals offense that Jamar Chase is the only one to finish double digits against the Titans. I mean, it's just not looked good. And before, I was sticking by Joe Burrow because you're expecting it to get going. But at this point, 4 weeks in, if you're a Joe Burrow fantasy owner, it's more than likely you're lucky if you're 2-2. You're more than likely 1-3 or 0-4. And at this point, I just don't think you can keep hoping that he's going to have a solid week and possibly drop to like a 1-4 and 0-5. You're running out of time and you need to start getting wins. And until he gives you something more, I just don't think you can keep rolling Burrow.
I mean, the only reason he hasn't been getting the Justin Fields treatment is name value alone, because this has been pathetic.
Yeah.
As far as fantasy goes, I mean, I'm not blaming it on Joe Burrow. If they're putting him out there with an injury, whatever the case may be, it's just not going well. And it doesn't, they go out and get Orlando Brown to protect. Something is just not right in that organization, because they've gotten all pro tackles to protect him, which maybe the offensive line coach is just terrible, because they still can't seem to protect him. He's always running for his life, and now he can't run for his life because he's hurt. So, yeah, it's awful right now.
Yeah, and on the other side of the ball, I mean, there's only 2 guys that you would start on the Titans. It's Derrick Henry and D-Hop. I mean, Tannehill had a solid game. He was 18 of 25, 240 yards, touchdown, an interception, 13.7 fantasy. Again, you're 100% obviously not starting Tannehill. He's looked like a lower tier quarterback. This is a solid week for him, 240 yards through the air. But again, there's not much to touch on Tannehill because no one's going to start him. Derrick Henry finally had a solid week. He had 22 carries, 122 yards. He had a couple carries which flashed old Derrick Henry, where he gets out in some space and he's stiff arming, extending the play 20, 30 yards. So it was good for Derrick Henry owners to see that. He did get a touchdown. He had 1 catch for 11 yards on 1 target, 24.4 fantasy points. And again, 59% of snaps. We're seeing him, he's not playing 70, 80% of snaps. And at this point, I don't expect him to get to that number this season. But this is the first game, Derrick Henry looked very efficient. He looked like Derrick Henry. And I mean,
He also threw for a touchdown.
Yeah, he also threw for a touchdown. And I mean, so Derrick Henry threw for more touchdowns than Joe Burrow this week.
The one thing I'll say is the Bengals defense looked lifeless for the most part. Mm-hmm. They let Tannehill put up 240 yards on them. That big Derrick Henry run, he bounced off like 5 guys.
Yeah.
They looked the touchdown pass. It's like if you've watched a damn Titans game, every time he does the jump pass when he lines up in Wildcat on the goal line. And Jermaine Pratt somehow just running back it's like there's no the organization as a whole, the team just looks flat. They
Mm-hmm.
came out flat. They played terrible on both sides of the ball. I'm not saying that Derrick Henry didn't have a great game, but I wouldn't expect this out of him every week because, like I said, the Bengals just looked horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I thought the Bengals defense was a good start this week, like for that reason, because Tannehill can't really do much right. Like, he's not passing well. It was just,
It was a shocker game for sure to see,
the Bengals are
especially how
disgusting
it
right
went
now as a
too.
whole.
Yeah, absolutely. Tyjae Spears is getting his run in still. 5 carries, 40 yards, 3 receptions for 18 on 4 targets. Finished 8.8 fantasy points, 53% snap count. If Derrick Henry gets hurt and misses time, he is for sure a guy I would pick up and throw in there. He does have that pass catching ability, but as long as Derrick Henry's healthy, I mean, if you're a Henry owner, I would
You should have
possibly,
Tyjae Spears.
yeah, I would
You
roster him.
should have him.
If I'm not though, I would not roster him. And then in the pass game, only guy that people are considering starting, D Hop. 4 catches, 63 yards on 6 targets, 10.3 fantasy points. He also only played 58% of the snaps, and he's a guy that you're not seeing that 80-90% snaps from as well. But he's the only Titans passing threat that I would consider starting. Um, Nick Westbrook-Akine had a very solid game. 5 for 51 on 6 targets with a touchdown, 16 fantasy points, played 83% of snaps. Had a solid week. Is he a guy I'm even rostering? No, because it's the Titans and Ryan Tannehill. I think this says more about the Bengals as a whole at this point than the Titans' offense. Um, Chiggy Okongwu had 3 catches for 29 yards on 3 targets, 5.9 points. He's a guy who, coming into the season, I kind of thought he was going to have a larger role in that offense, and he has not. He hasn't even broken double digits in a game on the season. So, I mean, definitely he's not a guy I'm rostering either, but he is someone that I thought would, kind of be around that tight end 10 on the season. And, I mean, we haven't seen it.
It wasn't much to ask for.
Yeah. But, I mean, other than that, the Titans defense had a good week. The Bengals looked flat as they've looked basically the whole season. Even their one win was a pretty ugly win. So, I mean, if you're a Bengals fantasy owner, which a lot of us are, we're just praying at this point that they can start to get it going, but they just have not been able to. And that's all I had for that game.
And everybody who drafted Jamar Chase wishes they can go back in time and get McCaffrey right now.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, we move on to another AFC. Well, two AFC North teams played each other. One of them showed up, one of them didn't. The Ravens pretty much dismantled the Browns in their home stadium. And it was, as a Lamar Jackson owner, as a Ravens fan, it was great to see because this was at the time the number 1 ranked defense in the NFL. They've been shutting down the pass, which they were very good against the pass in this game. You only saw Zay Flowers get 3 catches on 4 targets for 56 yards. He got 1 carry for -6 yards, which left you at 8 PPR points. And outside of that, I mean, Nelson Aguilar and Devin Duvernay each got 2 targets. Nelson caught 1, Duve caught 2. None of them did anything with them.
Mm-hmm.
So, to me, against tough defenses, which, the AFC North is known for tough defenses. And in a lot of these games, I'm not really looking at any Ravens wide receivers outside of Zay Flowers.
Mm-hmm.
When Odell comes back, it's a wait and see thing. I'm not, honestly, there's other wide receivers right now that I'd rather roster. And if Odell comes back and has a good week, he could be a waiver wire pickup later on in the year, but we'll see. As far as the running backs, Gus is going to be the main guy as long as he's healthy. He saw 69% of the snaps, got 15 carries for 48 yards. Didn't get the touchdown this week. He got 2 catches on 3 targets for only 1 yard. But, this is one of those things. If Gus Edwards doesn't score, you're going to get 6.9 points. That's kind of what you're going to see. If he scores, you're going to have a good week. And he's going to have the opportunity to score. Now they're running the ball more with Lamar. So you don't know if he's going to get those opportunities or if Lamar's going to take them. Something akin to the Philadelphia situation where you don't know if Jalen's going to get, well, I take that back. If they're at the 1, you do know Jalen's going to get it. But, it's just a possibility now. Lamar, on him, he had a great day. 4 total touchdowns. He fumbled once, which kind of, would have had that 30-point game, but it's all right. He was 15 for 19 in the air, 186 yards, 2 touchdowns to the boy Mark Andrews.
Mm-hmm.
He had 9 carries for 27 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. And the fumble just came on a botched handoff. Bad play. Yeah, I will admit he needs to be more careful with the ball because in certain situations, like in the Colts game last week, those turnovers hurt us as they hurt any team. But Lamar is getting better and better. You saw him hit Mark Andrews in the back corner of the end zone over 2 defenders. You can say what you want, but the guy is a hell of a passer. He's hitting all the passes people were saying he couldn't make before, and he's accurate. As long as they're able to protect him, Lamar's going to be good in the air and on the ground. Back to the running backs. Like I said, Gus got the large chunk of it. Justice Hill only got 12% of the snaps. Melvin got 19. They each got 3 carries. So neither one of them I'm really interested in, especially the Ravens rookie running back Keaton Mitchell should be coming off of the IR this week, and he looked really good in preseason. So it's Gus Edwards, and if you want to take a shot on Keaton Mitchell, maybe that. But other than that, Mark Andrews is the guy.
Yep.
5 catches, 5 targets, 80 yards, 2 touchdowns. This is what you drafted the guy for. And I think he's going to have a lot more weeks like this than you got in the first 3 weeks. I think that as this Ravens offense moves forward, you're going to see a lot of big scoring weeks from Mark Andrews. And there's not too much to say on that. He's Lamar's favorite target, always has been, always will be. He's reliable. He's going to get the job done.
Yeah, and
on the Browns. Go ahead there.
Yeah, this is the first. The Ravens play a really good defense this week. They're a little short-handed at the receiver position. Obviously, J.K. Dobbins gone for the year, and this is the week you see Mark Andrews take that giant leap forward. And it makes sense to me because Mark is absolutely proven. He's obviously Lamar's number 1 target. And like Schiff said, you can expect more weeks like this. The Ravens have kind of not been able to get Lamar offensive threats. I think they absolutely hit on Zay Flowers. I'd say if you're starting any offensive threat, Zay Flowers as like a flex play, I like it. Obviously, I like Mark Andrews a lot. Lamar, with JK going down, even with Gus, you're seeing Lamar running the ball more. And that makes Lamar even more valuable as a fantasy quarterback. It can be a year, depending. He has a couple more of these, 2, possibly 3 rushing touchdown games. Lamar could easily finish as a top 3 fantasy quarterback. Would not surprise me at all if he did. But yeah,
this offense is humming right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Coming off of it, and he was interviewed post game, and they said, "Do you feel like you guys did good on?" He was like, "I don't feel like we're at where I want us to be. We left a lot of points on the field, and." With that, and like I said last week, when Lamar got 14 carries, he's probably going to get around 8-9 carries a week, and he got 9 carries. So
yeah, but that's all I had for the Ravens.
Yeah, so then with that, we're going to go on to the Browns side of the ball, which it was at first Deshaun Watson wasn't going to be playing. Deshaun Jackson's a much better guy.
Obviously not playing either.
Yeah, not playing either. But it was Deshaun Watson wasn't going to be playing. And then he was going to be playing. And then last second, it's going to be DTR, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. And, honestly, I can't. The guy had a rough first start. He's going up against a division rival. The Ravens' pass rush came to play. I mean, Jadeveon Clowney was all over the place. He couldn't wrap him up a lot of the time, but he was, hurrying him all the time. The Ravens' defense was on point today, or yesterday. They picked DTR off 3 times. He was 19 for 36 for 121 yards, but outside of that, 4 carries, 24 yards. As I said, if he's in, you might expect him to run a little bit, but the Ravens' defense was on top of it, and as a whole, this offense just was not able to do much. Jerome Ford saw 62% of the snaps. In this backfield, he's the guy that I like. He was only 9 for 26 on the ground, which, like I said, this Ravens defense came to play today. They were not giving up much. But the thing that I did like, he got 6 targets again, and he looks good as a receiving back, and that's going to give him value moving forward, especially when Deshaun's back, and they have a little bit better of a matchup. Kareem Hunt only saw 22%. He will get worked in more. He's going to be that number 2 change of pace back. Only got 5 carries for 12 yards. Did not get a target. And you saw Pierre Strong get 5 carries for 49 yards, but this was already after Jerome Ford and Kareem had both been pulled from the game, and both teams are pretty much playing their backups. So I would not take this as anything at all. This backfield is Kareem Hunt and Jerome Ford, and Kareem Hunt will have some value just because, and if Ford ever were to go down, he will be the guy in that backfield. It's not going to be Pierre Strong. But there will be better weeks for this Browns offense. And obviously with the stats you heard from DTR, you could assume that none of the receivers had good days at all. And with that assumption, you would be very right. Amari Cooper, wasn't able to do much. Had 6 targets, only 1 catch. Like I said, DTR was hurried most of the time, so the targets weren't very good. His 1 catch only went for 16 yards. So 2.6 PPR points for Amari Cooper is not something you are very happy with on any given week. If you started Elijah Moore and you watched the game, you were screaming at your TV when you saw him run backwards for 20 yards on a jet sweep.
Yeah.
That was a very interesting decision, which could very well affect his playing time moving forward. That was some of the worst awareness in football I've seen in a minute. But he got 4 targets, caught 2 of them for 20 yards, and like I said, negated 2 of those points with
that run.
With that single run.
Yeah.
But other than that, the receiver Donovan Peoples-Jones got 4 targets, caught 1 for 7 yards. Cedric Tillman actually got some play in this game, kind of with the backups, caught 1 for 5. It was disgusting.
Yeah.
Jerome Ford got the same amount of targets as Amari Cooper, but the lone bright spot in this game was the tight end David Njoku for the Browns. He caught 6 for 46, which if you're playing PPR, that gives you 10.6 points.
Solid.
If you're not, that only gives you 4.6. So, he is someone that you can probably count on decently as a tight end moving forward. He's better than a lot of names that are out there. And yeah, with that, as far as defenses go, the Ravens defense looks like a startable one, especially against, they have the Steelers next week. I think Kenny Pickens is going to miss. I don't know how many weeks. We'll go over that when we do the injury report in this next episode. Pat Freiermuth is going to be out. So they're going to be starting Mitch Trubisky. And the week after that, they have the Titans. So Ravens defense is a good streaming defense. But as far as that game, that's really all I got.
Yeah, and if you're a Browns, if you have Browns players on your fantasy team, this isn't a week you can, I wouldn't panic really at all. DTR kind of got thrown into the fire, especially if Deshaun was planning to play and DTR assumed he was not going to be playing, and then last second they say you are. It's a very tough week for him. If I'm an Amari Cooper owner, if I'm Jerome Ford owner, I'm not really freaking out about it as long as Deshaun can get healthy again. If we see DTR continuing to start, obviously we're going to see hits to that offense. The Ravens, obviously a division game, they did show up to play. So, if DTR does start again and it's a more favorable matchup, I mean, you have to start Amari Cooper. Jerome Ford's getting volume, but he's a guy you can possibly keep on the bench, depending how your running back room is. If DTR continues to start, if Deshaun comes back and he's healthy and ready to go.
The Browns do go on bye next week. So I do imagine that with a week of rest, they will come back with Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, by week 6.
Yeah, so the ship should be righted by that time.
Yeah, so nothing to freak out about if, on the Browns side of the ball.
It was a rookie quarterback's first start against the division rival, something that you could expect unless you're the Raiders.
Yeah, and that'll segue us. We're bringing up Kenny Pickett. That segues us right into the Pittsburgh Steelers. Traveled to Houston to play the Texans and got annihilated. The Texans beat him 30-6. Kenny Pickett was out there for 83% of the snaps, and he did not look good at all. He finished 15 of 23 for 114 yards, did not throw a touchdown, threw a pick, had 4.46 fantasy points. And yeah, as we mentioned, he did sustain that knee injury. They are hopeful that, his ACL, MCL are still intact, but we don't have confirmation on that yet. One thing we do know is he will miss time. No matter what, he will be missing weeks, so it will be Trubisky, and that is going to, we assume, hurt that offense. The pass catchers in this game, we talked about George Pickens. It's funny that when we had David on, he had George Pickens as someone you must sit this week. And then we're like, yeah, well, and we're like, well, because we realized, the Texans are missing 2 cornerbacks. George Pickens should be able to eat. No, we were correct. He is a guy you should have sat this week. George Pickens had 3 catches for 25 yards, 7 targets, 5.5 fantasy points. Did not have a good week with Trubisky now in. It's weird because at least me personally, I don't think Pickett is that much better of a passer than Trubisky. I think he offers a lot more with his legs. But so we'll see. Calvin Austin, 5 targets, 3 for 24, 5.9 points, 90% of snaps. Again, honestly, probably not a guy I'm rostering either. Allen Robinson is fading more and more into the abyss. He was irrelevant again this week. One thing that's been consistent, he has played at least 80% of snaps every week. But other than week 1, that really hasn't amounted to anything. So as of now, George Pickens is your only viable receiving option until Deontay comes back. Pat Freiermuth, 3 catches for 7 yards on 4 targets. He did have that hamstring injury, which took him out of the game. He may miss multiple weeks. He's having the imaging done today on that hamstring. So in our next episode, when we go over injury report, hopefully we'll have a better evaluation to give on that. But if Freiermuth does miss time, that brings Darnell Washington in line to be the full-time starter there. But with how we've seen Freiermuth used, I don't see Darnell Washington being used a crazy amount more either. So it's tough.
He could be a goal line threat. He caught a lot of, I think in the camp they were saying he got 6 passes and 4 of them were touchdowns. But you have to get to the goal line to be a threat.
So the Steelers are another team where
they don't do.
Their offense is not very good right now, and not really an offense I am wanting to be a part of. Their rush game, Najee actually had a decently productive game. He had 14 carries, 71 yards, 1 catch for 32 on 2 targets, 11.3 fantasy points.
Outscore Breeze.
Najee did outscore Breeze.
He did outscore Breeze.
He did outscore Breeze. That's 11.3 fantasy points. He played 49% of the snaps, and his counterpart also played 49% of the snaps, Jaylen Warren. 8 carries,
He's getting
29
up
yards,
there.
6 receptions for 26 on 6 targets, 11.5 fantasy points. So they had a very similar week. One thing we do love in PPR is the Jaylen Warren 6 receptions compared to the Najee 1. With Trubisky coming in, honestly, I have no idea how that's going to affect anything because they have not run the ball super efficiently. So you assume they're going to have to pass. And now they're a little bit, even more banged up than they were before. So we'll just have to see. But outlook on Steelers fantasy wise is kind of ugly at this point. Outside of Jaylen Warren, from where you drafted him or picked him up off the waiver, he has solid value.
I mean, he does, but just the Steelers' offense as a whole has
It's
just
so
been
bad.
pretty disgusting. I mean, only putting up 3 points against the Texans. It's funny because Steelers fans are in shambles. Fire everybody, clean out the organization. It looks bad, even though they're 2-2. But with Kenny Pickett possibly being out multiple weeks, like you said, I don't know what it's going to look like with Trubisky. It's a wait and see thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have to see when they bring Deontay Johnson off the IR. I know he wasn't put on in the beginning of the season, so it will not be this week. But I don't know how serious the injury is either. So whether or not Kenny's out multiple weeks, they're still going to have Deontay out. Whether Freiermuth misses multiple weeks or not, this offense is just getting worse and worse. So I'm not too sure what I'm doing with any of that. I think if you have Najee, if you have Jaylen Warren, you're kind of just holding on at this point because you're not going to get too much value for them.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a chance it gets better. We know Mike Tomlin has never had a losing season. So if anybody can do something about the dumpster fire that is that offense, and maybe they fire Matt Canada, then there could be hope for something. But until then, I'm benching him, but I'm holding on.
Yeah, and on the other side of the ball, there has been a lot of upside. CJ Stroud has looked amazing for what you'd expect. He has the Texans offense looking completely revamped. And through the offseason, when you're seeing him sign, Robert Woods, Dalton Schultz, were kind of like, this offense is going to be horrendous. And it has not been. CJ Stroud finished 16 of 30, 306 yards, 2 touchdowns, has still not thrown an interception. 4 carries on the ground for 16 yards, 21.8 fantasy points. He is very solid. If you have a quarterback on a bye
He's a guy.
and you have to pick up someone on the waiver, he's definitely someone to consider depending the matchup. And I mean, coming into this game, the Steelers, their defense isn't crazy, but their defensive line is very solid. And CJ Stroud, I mean, they kind of tore them apart a little bit. Dameon Pierce on the ground is getting an insane amount of volume. He had 24 carries for 81 yards, 1 catch for 27 on 2 targets, 11.8 fantasy points. He played 59% of the snaps, his highest of the season. We're seeing that gap between him and Devin Singletary just increase every single week. So Dameon Pierce owners, it is very good to see him getting more and more volume as he comes back from injury, and he's just getting ramped up more and more. Through the air, Nico Collins is definitely the number one there. He had a monster game. He had 7 catches for 168 yards on 9 targets, 2 touchdowns, 35.8 fantasy points. Played 76% of snaps. Nico Collins coming into this year where he was being drafted is looking like an insane value, and I don't blame anyone for letting him fall as far as he did. Coming in, the hopes. Nico Collins being a number 1 receiver on a team just sounds terrible. Tank Dell had a bad week, but I think he is going to emerge as that wide receiver too. He only had 1 catch for 16 yards, 3 targets, 3.9 fantasy, played 70% of snaps. Robert Woods has cooled off since, he started the season really hot, but he's been cooling off the past couple weeks. He had 3 catches, 26 yards on 6 targets, 5.6 fantasy points, also played 72% of snaps. So all 3 of those receivers, those are their main 3. They're going to be the guys out there. Dalton Schultz caught a touchdown, had a viable week, 3 catches, 42 yards on 3 targets, 13.2 fantasy points, only 49% of snaps. He's still not a guy I would even roster. I know he had the touchdown. He had a decent week, but
I don't hate it just because if CJ Stroud is going to continue passing like this, just with that much passing volume, that's a big pie. And if he has a decent slice of that pie, it could be better than, say, like Dallas Goedert, who at this time is not getting any targets. And, guys like that, or Hayden Hurst, who on the Panthers, it's a little pie, little slice. You want a guy who can get something at least.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. But I mean, that's all I had for the Texans. They're looking like a very solid offense. Stroud's looking very good. I didn't know if you had more to add or if you wanted to move to the next game.
No, not really too much more on that. That's something that I'd rather not talk about. I mean, the Steelers, we know what they are now. Their offense is bad. They're going to be lacking guys. And I think the Texans are just proving week in and week out that they are a good offense. They have a pretty good defense, and they're a team capable of providing in fantasy football. So I still have no problem with starting Tank Dell because any given week it could be Nico, and we saw Nico have a bad week last week. Tank Dell had a good week. It could be Nico and Dell. It could be Robert Wood. You just don't know. But in an offense where it's kind of like a Gabe Davis type thing, where there's always a chance when there's that much offensive production that they're going to get something good. So I'd rather start him over a guy like DJ Chark or something.
Yeah.
Which shouldn't really be that much of an option, but you never know. So with that, we're going to move on to what I call the toilet bowl. And
the Caleb Bowl.
I said, yeah, the Caleb Bowl. We'll see how that goes throughout the season. But yeah, right now Chicago does control the first 2 picks in the draft. But I said this could be a pretty high scoring game, and it was. Denver ended up winning 31-28. Russell Wilson didn't have too bad of a week. Like I said, he was a good start this week. He was 21 for 28, 223 yards, threw 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, 22.2 fantasy points. He rushed 4 times for 13 yards. I mean, you're seeing more of the rest that we wanted. Now we're seeing it this year. They had a bad offense, good defense last year, and that's flipped, which is perfect for fantasy football.
Yep.
So I'm liking the Broncos offense right now. Javonte Williams, unfortunately, went out early in this game. At that time, he'd only gotten 2 carries, 3 targets, which he caught all of for only 9 yards. Finished 3.9 points, but like I said, he only played 17% of the snaps because he got injured in this one. Went out with what they're saying is a hip flexor, and he might be in jeopardy for this upcoming week, but we'll see. One thing that I would be slightly concerned with at the very least is the emergence of the rookie Jaleel McLaughlin, who, stepped right in and sure as hell looked a lot better than Samaje Perine.
Yeah.
He ended up with 7 carries for 72 yards, caught 3 passes for 32 and a touchdown, gave you 19.4 in PPR. He only played 33% of the snaps compared to 46 for Samaje Perine, which, Perine's just not going to be that guy. And if Javonte were to miss, Jaleel McLaughlin is a guy that I'd look at as a possible, spot starter. And he just looks a lot better than Perine. I don't know. Javonte's still kind of ramping up off of that injury like we talked about, but this hopefully doesn't hold him out for too long. If he comes back and he's starting, I'd take a little bit of caution with it. But, I still like Javonte, especially throughout the rest of the year. But McLaughlin is a guy who could start to eat into his workload a little bit with how good he did in this game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you average 10 yards a carry, that's going to raise some eyebrows. And on to the receivers. You'd expect, since Russell Wilson had the 3 touchdowns, someone's going to have a good week, right? Not really. And that guy was McLaughlin, and everybody else was kind of mediocre. I mean, Cortland Sutton gave you the touchdown, which kind of salvaged his week, but other than that, he caught 3 passes on 5 targets for only 27 yards. Gave you 11.7. He played 83% of the snaps, which you like to see your guy on the field. Marvin Mims, if you happen to start him on a hope that he'd catch one of those long balls for a touchdown this week, that didn't happen. He finished with 2 catches for 47 yards. He continues to prove to be a deep threat, but if he doesn't finish with a touchdown or, like he's the super boomer bust guy. I like the talent, but it's pretty much him and it's Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy as guys that I'm looking to for starters on any given week. Jeudy will probably continue to get better. He only caught 3 of 5 for 52 yards. Played 63% of the snaps. Like we said, he's still a guy coming off of a ligament tear, so it's going to get ramped up throughout the season. But 8.2 points, if you started him, you're probably not too happy with that this week. But it's kind of one of those guys that you just got to roll with the punches. There will be good weeks coming, in my opinion, especially with how Russ has been looking. But other than that, there's like the tight ends are nothing on Denver.
Yeah.
I wouldn't look at one of them. And that's about it. If you got anything on Denver.
Yeah, if Javonte does miss time, P. Ryan, our owners, were hoping that he would be the guy, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be that way. Even if P. Ryan gets more volume, he doesn't seem nearly as explosive as Jaleel. So Jaleel's a guy to look for on the waiver wire if Javonte is missing any time. I've seen that it's not too serious, so even if he does
6 carries for 12 yards.
Yeah, so if Javonte does miss time, it'll probably just be a week. But with that being said, if you need a plug-in start and you're feeling a little frisky, I mean, I wouldn't hate the Jaleel McLaughlin pickup. He did look very good with what he played with. P. Ryan just has not looked, and it's weird. He looked okay in Cincinnati. He had his flashes, out the backfield, but they were a crazy high-powered offense. And even though Russ is showing some success this season, P. Ryan has not exactly translated into that success. Cortland Sutton's been a safe start at that wide receiver 3 flex position because, he has gotten volume, and when he's not getting the crazy volume, he's gotten the touchdowns. I like Jerry Jeudy. I don't know if I'm plugging him into lineups just yet, but you're obviously rostering him. I like Jerry Jeudy a lot. And Marvin Mims is kind of the Wish.com Gabe Davis. He's not as good as Gabe Davis yet. He's not an offense as good as Gabe Davis is. So, I mean, if you're starting him, you are really, really hoping for the touchdown, but the chance of that touchdown coming is not nearly as high as a receiver with Gabe Davis. So, I mean, that's really it for the Broncos. Russ has looked better than we thought.
Yeah, and with that, we're going to go over to the Chicago side of the ball, where Justin Fields, like we said, you got to kick the tires one last week on him against this Broncos defense that gave up 105 points in the last 2 weeks, and I think we're starting to realize that the reality of it is the Broncos defense is just not good this year.
Yeah.
So you can probably play a lot of your guys against the Broncos. Fields finished 28 for 35, 335 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 pick, 28.9 fantasy points. I mean, this is what you drafted Justin Fields for.
Mm-hmm.
And could we look to see this continue? I don't know. I don't know if it will. If it's me, I'm taking this and running with it and seeing what I can get for Justin Fields, because there's going to be more consistent options out there. I'm not very confident on a week-to-week basis with what he's going to give me against, it's a matchup dependent start, and I'm, not really comfortable with that. Like we said, he only ran the ball 4 times for 25 yards. He's just not getting the designed runs like he was, and he's not going to throw for 335 yards and 4 touchdowns every week.
Yeah.
But off of Justin Fields, though, Khalil Herbert had a really good game. We were hearing coming into this week that Roschon Johnson would be the guy to kind of get the start. This was not true at all.
No.
Roschon had 5 carries for 13 yards, and Khalil had 18 for 103. It wasn't close. I think this has kind of been determined now that Khalil is the guy in this backfield. I mean, if you outcarry the other guy by 13, that kind of tells me all I need to know.
Yeah.
And Khalil Herbert also finished with 4 catches on 5 targets and 19 yards and a touchdown. Mm-hmm. So if you started Khalil Herbert this week, you were happy.
Yeah.
It's a great week of production. And Roschon Johnson, at this point, I don't know whether I'm choosing to hold on to the Bears RB2. Honestly, he might be droppable, but at the same time, running backs are very scarce. And should Khalil Herbert go down, you then have a running back 1. But it does, after all those reports that, he's going to be the guy, he comes out and finishes with 5 carries, that doesn't excite me very much. I mean, Khalil got 78% of the snaps.
Yeah.
So, 22.2 fantasy points for him.
He's another one that if you can package off the huge week from Khalil, if you can package Khalil and, possibly a wide receiver to someone that's deep on RBs for an upgrade at that RB spot, that's definitely something I would consider.
Yeah, 100%. Because, like we said, they're not going to play the Denver Broncos every week, so you just do not know. One guy we said that you pretty much had to start and kind of have to start every week based on where you drafted him is DJ Moore. And he finished 8 catches, 9 targets, 131 yards, and a touchdown.
Yep.
You got what you drafted him for this week. 27.1 points. Honestly, the only receiver on the Chicago Bears, even Darnell Mooney at this point, just because we could say it a million times, they're not going to play the Broncos.
Yeah.
So the other receivers are going to lose relevance. Cole Kmet had a blow-up week. And another guy, I mean, him I would give a shot simply due to the fact that tight ends are pretty trash on a week-to-week basis unless you have some of the top guys. But Cole Kmet, he played 74% of the snaps. We kind of like to see our tight ends on the field more around 80 and above. But he still got 9 targets, 7 catches, 85 yards, and 2 touchdowns, which I believe made him the tight end 1 on the week so far. So unless Darren Waller does something insane, he will be the tight end 1 on the week. And that's 27.6 fantasy points. And he's probably on your waiver wires. We'll go over that later in the week. But it's not, I wouldn't expect this production to be replicated, but he might be a guy that you can count on. I think right now his worst week is 4.2 points. And from the tight end, that's what you're getting like damn near every week out of Kyle Pitts. So on and so forth, though. That's about all I got for that game. Not one I want to talk too much about, except that we kind of know what these teams are now. If the Bears have a good matchup, they're able to put up points. And the Broncos do not have a good defense, but their offense is good enough to put up points. So you want to play your Broncos and play your guys against the Broncos.
Yeah, absolutely. And we go from, 2 of the worst teams in the NFL to 2 of the best teams in the NFL, and that was the Dolphins traveling to Buffalo to play the Bills. And,
2 of the best teams.
You don't think they're 2 of the best teams in the NFL?
I said 2 of the best teams.
Oh, okay. It
was dumb, but you didn't hear it.
No, it's good. It's good. The Dolphins The Bills beat the Dolphins 48-20. The Dolphins were going back and forth very early, and then their offense kind of stagnated pretty significantly, and the Bills just kept going. Tua, I mean, still had a decent week. He was 25 of 35, 282 yards, a touchdown, a pick, 15 fantasy points. I mean, not a terrible week by any means, but one of the lower end for Tua on the season so far. Devon Achane, did I say it correct?
Mm-hmm.
Achane
Yeah.
finished 8 carries, 101 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 receptions for 19 yards on 5 targets, 27 points flat, 60% of the snaps. That's the big thing I'm looking at here. A couple weeks ago, we told you guys to sell Mostert high. And after that past week with Achane going, he had a huge game. Mostert had a huge game too. That really was the week to sell him because it was clear that this wasn't just going to be his backfield anymore. And this was a perfect example of that. Mostert finished this game 7 rushes, 9 yards, 3 catches for 36 on 5 targets. He had 5.5 fantasy points and only saw 43% of snaps. So we're already seeing Achane kind of take over that backfield. He looks better.
This is what the Dolphins drafted him for.
Yeah, this is what they drafted him for, and when Jeff Wilson comes back, I think that's going to cut more into Mostert than it is Achane at this point. So even now, with the rough week from Mostert, I think you can still get solid value for him, but I would go out and get that before we see more weeks like this week. His value after this week is significantly lower than it was after last. But, a good selling point is this is the Bills' defense.
He's on a good offense.
Yeah, he's on a good offense.
But it is going to, like you said, it is going to make it tough because just the way things look right now, it's like you've seen what Achane's done for 2 weeks, and anybody with eyes has seen what he's done for 2 weeks in a row and sees that Raheem Mostert is 31 years old. So your only real selling point left is how explosive that offense is and the opportunities that he will have.
Yeah.
But it's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
This is a guy you might have to just hold on to.
Absolutely. And we saw Tyreek get contained for the first time this year. Him and Waddle both, actually. Tyreek finished 3 catches, 58 yards with only 5 targets, 10.2 fantasy points. Waddle, 4 receptions, 46 yards, 5 targets, 8.6. Tyreek, I'm not worried about at all in any way. Waddle, on the other hand, it's kind of weird. They haven't used, and I know he missed some time, he hasn't been fully healthy, but Waddle hasn't been used as much as I thought he would this season. And that could be because Mostert came out so hot running the ball. Now you have Achane who's running the ball very well. And that's something they didn't have last season. Wilson and Mostert weren't exactly the greatest at running, but they're seeing success in the run game, and Waddle's kind of paid the price in that a bit. The gap between him and Hill has become so significant. I'm still starting Waddle every week, obviously. He has huge upside, but, had to mention as a fantasy owner, Waddle hasn't produced to what you would hope to start this season.
No.
And
I think he's a good trade for target.
Yeah, absolutely, because his value is
probably buy him fairly low.
Is fairly low. And I know me and Schiff kind of talked about who the Dolphins wide receiver 3 was. Are we ready to admit it's Braxton Berrios as the wide receiver 3? He was the leading receiver for the Dolphins this week. He had 6 catches, 43 yards on 6 targets for a touchdown. He only played 49% of snaps, but gave you 17.4 fantasy points. He's not someone I'm rostering, but it is worth mentioning because he did have a very solid week. So shout out Braxton Berrios for that.
He's the little gadget guy for the Dolphins.
Yeah, he'll
have McDaniel offense.
Yeah, he'll have weeks like this, but more weeks than not, he's gonna finish 5-6 fantasy points at the most. Durham Smythe had a solid game, but I'm not gonna touch on him too much because Titans.
You saw 9 different guys get targets in this game too.
Yeah, and
You know,
Dolphins
that's
tight
what it.
ends are not viable fantasy plays, so I'm not even gonna go too much in with him. Um, the Bills had a very good game. Josh Allen looked fantastic. He only threw the ball 25 times, completed 21 of them, 320 yards, 4 touchdowns, 4 rushes for 17 yards, another touchdown, 36 and a half fantasy points. This was a Josh Allen week.
Hmm.
Divisional game. And Josh Allen he came out ready. He was getting the ball mainly to Stephon Diggs, who had 6 catches for 120 yards on 7 targets, 3 touchdowns, 36 fantasy points, an absolutely monster week at Stephon. He's almost guaranteed your wide receiver one on your fantasy team. Not much to touch on with Stephon. He's doing Stephon things out there, what we would expect. Gabe Davis, 3 catches for 61 yards on 3 targets and a touchdown. He had 15.1 fantasy points. The one thing with Gabe Davis, and we touched on it with, Marvin Mims, Gabe Davis is super touchdown dependent. And on the Bills, more times than not, he's going to get you that touchdown. But 3 out of the 4 weeks so far, he has seen 4 targets, and 3 targets for 2 catches, 1 catch, and then this game, 3 catches. But he has 3 touchdowns through 4 games. So that's when you're seeing, Gabe Davis, week 1, 5 fantasy points. Week 2 against the Raiders, where he had 7 targets, 6 catches, 92 yards. He had 21. And then he's had 10 and 15. He is very touchdown dependent. If he and
He's very volatile, as most wide receiver twos in most offenses are. But the
uh-huh.
question you have to ask yourself is, do I want, and no offense, do I want the wide receiver two on the Raiders with Jacoby
Mhm.
Myers if, they have a rookie playing? Or do I want the wide receiver two on the Bills in the highest projected point total game of the week?
Mhm.
These are the questions you have to ask yourself when you're making these start sit decisions.
Yeah. Mainly getting the point if someone is super high on Gabe Davis and you can get someone who's getting, 6 to 7, 8 targets a game, I would possibly look to make the move just because he's 3 touchdowns through 4
Yeah,
games.
like if you could package Gabe Davis and someone else for Jalen Waddle,
Yeah, no,
like
absolutely. And through his first 3 years in the league, Gabe Davis had 7 touchdowns, 6 touchdowns, and 7 touchdowns in a very similar offense with, him being the number 2, and he already has 3 this season. I mean, I like Gabe Davis. He's, a touchdown or bust guy on a super high powered offense, so a lot of the times you're going to get the boom on that. But just something worth mentioning. Um, the tight ends, we're seeing very similar. Kincaid had the better game, 4 catches, 27 yards, 5 targets. Knox, 1 catch, 12 yards on 1 target. But they're still playing. Kincaid played 52% of snaps. Knox played 50. I don't hate starting Kincaid because it's the Bills' offense, but I honestly don't even see it changing this year. They're really liking the 50-50 split with their tight ends. Kincaid brings another weapon to that offense that they haven't had before, and that's a second tight end. But I mean, that's just going to be a wash, at least in snap count most of the year, so it's kind of a tricky play there.
yeah, I'd say with that, games that have the higher projected point totals that they're playing, that they're going to have to pass the ball more in, are games that I would consider starting Kincaid or starting Gabe Davis.
Mhm.
Games that, even though Gabe Davis got the touchdown last week against Washington, like games like that where they might go up against an offense that will struggle to move or score the ball, I don't know if I like them as much because they're not going to need to throw the ball.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And for the run game, James Cook had a pedestrian week running the ball. He had 12 carries, 29 yards, but did score a touchdown. He had 1 catch for 48 yards on 1 target, 14.7 fantasy points. We didn't see. He had 40% of snaps. The Bills were revolving that running back room a little bit more this game. Latavius Murray is the running back 2 in comparison to Damian Harris. Latavius 4 carries, 32 yards, 2 targets, 2 catches, 24 yards, 7.6 fantasy points, 33% of the snaps. James Cook owners, you're not worried at all. He's obviously the RB1 there. It's
And
actually
this week
nice.
we finally saw that they'll put him in goal line sets. He
Yeah.
got that touchdown at the goal line, which it's like, oh my God, this is what we wanted. Like, that's what you're not going to see out of Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, if we had thought previously that, okay, James Cook's capable of scoring touchdowns, but he's going to have to do it from outside of like the 10-yard line. But no, so this was a great thing to see, especially me being someone who has James.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that's all I had for that game.
All right, and with that, we are going to go over to the Bucs and the Saints. This one, Baker Mayfield looked good. He really did. One thing we talked about is that we thought Mike Evans would have a tough week going up against Marshawn Lattimore, and Chris Godwin would probably be the guy. That was indeed the case. Chris Godwin had 8 catches on 11 targets for 114 yards, which, as a 19.4 point PPR finish, if you had him starting, you absolutely loved it. As far, Mike Evans, we told you, when they play the Saints, it's going to be tough because it's going to be him and Marshawn Lattimore. And when they play them again later this year, you're going to experience probably the same thing. So you're going to want to start Chris Godwin again that week. You saw the rookie Devin Tompkins actually come in and have I think he's a rookie. No, Trey Palmer's a rookie, but Devin Tompkins, 4 catches, 4 targets, 45 yards, 1 touchdown. Mm-hmm. He got what Mike Evans wasn't going to get this week. And every other week, Mike Evans is a great start. Chris Godwin, I like, most weeks he's going to give you around 10 points, and then he'll have these blow-up weeks like this. So I love starting Chris Godwin every week. In that backfield, it's getting a little muddled. Rachaad White had 15 carries for 56. And while Keyshawn Vaughn only had 16 yards, he got 9 carries. So as a Rachaad White owner, you just don't like to see that. Mm-hmm. Because the one thing about Rachaad that you did like was that he has all the volume in this backfield. While he may not look the best some of the time, he's at least getting all of the work. And while he did get 3 catches for 22 yards, the 15 rushes for 56, he didn't do much else. He didn't get a touchdown, so you're not thrilled with the production that you're getting out of Rachaad White right now. But that was kind of the risk you took. We're hoping that Keyshawn Vaughn doesn't, and he shouldn't, because I think Rachaad White is more skilled. But case in point is that the guys that you can really trust on this offense are Chris Godwin and Mike Evans when they're not playing the Saints. And, as a fantasy quarterback, Baker's not looking like the worst option. And I've kind of thought that because when you give a guy Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, they should be able to do a little bit of something. And he threw the ball 32 times on Sunday, completed 25, 246, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick, 23.9 fantasy points. He also ran the ball 8 times for 31 yards. And if he's going to run the ball, and Baker likes to chuck it. So you're going to see the days like the game against the Eagles. But we also see that this is in his range of outcomes, kind of like Russ. It's someone that we kind of have to accept that they might be a good fantasy option this year. I'm not jumping to start them, but like I said, they look okay. Kate Otten came out and had, if he didn't have that touchdown, it would have looked a lot more similar to last week. So I'm still not really too confident with Kate Otten. He got 4 targets, caught 3 of them for 13 yards. And like I said, he got that touchdown. So I don't know too many people who were starting him, but if you were, that kind of saved you. So outside of that, that's kind of all I have for Tampa Bay.
Yeah. Baker's actually looked a lot better than people thought he would. He's currently the quarterback 13. Obviously, that could change if Geno or Daniel Jones have a crazy monstrous game. But Baker's at least looked like a quarterback where if your starter's on a bye, depending on the matchup, you definitely can think about starting him. Um, Rashad
Yes,
White,
it's not like a throw up in your mouth kind of start anymore, really.
no, it is not. He's actually it seems like he's reviving his career. He's keeping the Bucs relevant. Their defense looked good this game.
Yeah, he's not being a dickhead in Tampa Bay. He seems to be having fun there. Like, it's looking good. They're
Yeah,
probably going to be the team to take that division.
yeah, I would say yeah, it very well could be that way. They're gonna have a bye this next week, but after that, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, you're still starting. Rashad White owners, you are pondering. He's still getting volume. I mean, he played 70% of snaps. He got 15. You said 15 carries,
Yeah.
which is right on line. On the season, he's getting 50 or 14 to like 18, somewhere in that range. Had a couple targets out the backfield. His main thing is the Bucs are one of the least efficient teams running the ball. His yards per carry are horrendous, almost always under 4 yards a carry.
Yeah.
But that's something we've seen from him. Yeah, Keyshawn Vaughn getting the carries. I don't see long term Keyshawn Vaughn really like being a threat there. But Rashad, you
It's
were
just the
hoping,
willingness to give another guy in that backfield 9 carries when
yeah,
the main thing you're relying on is the volume of. It's like, should they start liking Sean Tucker a little bit and giving him that volume? Does something with it, that could be a little more dangerous. Right now, I'm still kind of holding my breath starting Rashad White, but it
yeah.
just
Something we were
makes you a
hoping,
little
I think,
nervous.
is a little more targets out of the backfield. I was expecting 4 to 5
Yeah.
a game average for Rashad, possibly more. And I mean, I think he's hit that one time this year. Uh, but again, yeah, he's definitely someone to monitor. Obviously, he's gonna be on a bye this coming week, so he's not gonna be in your lineup. But come week 6, I believe they play the Lions, so we'll revisit it then and see, what we think in the
And
matchup.
the Lions have been a good rush defense, so
Yeah.
I'd be a little hesitant. But moving on to the New Orleans side of the ball, for some reason they decided to go with Derek Carr this week with I think his AC joint is sprained.
Yep.
If
And
not,
you could tell.
it's damaged to the point where you could. I mean, he couldn't throw the ball down the field. And he threw the ball 37 times, completed 23. It was like Joe Burrow for 127 yards.
Yeah, it's horrendous for that many completions.
So I was very confused as to why he played, considering you're not going to win the game when the defense knows you can't throw the ball more than 10 yards down the field. But the benefactor of that was Alvin Kamara. And he ended up catching 13 of 14 for only 33 yards. But that just shows you, like, the depth of target was nowhere, and they knew where the ball was going to go, so it was nothing's going to happen. But if you had Alvin Kamara in PPR and you started him, you had a one day. He rushed the ball 11 times for 51 yards, which, 4.6 per carry, that's not too bad.
No.
Not at all. It's you're seeing a lot worse from a lot of running backs right now, like Ramondre Stevenson. But yeah, Alvin, 21.4 fantasy points in his first game back.
Very solid.
You love to see it.
On your
And
bench.
I still scored 184
I
points.
know.
Don't get
I
me
just had to
wrong.
throw it in there. I had to throw it in
But
there.
but it's something you like to see. And while Derek Carr won't be that limited every week, you know that he does. I mean, we saw how many receiving yards Josh Jacobs got last year. So it's definitely something that if you have Alvin Kamara and you can trade him super high off of this last game, then I do it. But otherwise, I'm not trading him for like any running back less than Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
just being, because he's going to get. Kendre Miller got 1 carry. Taysom Hill got 4. They gave a fullback Prentice 1. Derek Carr ran the ball twice. I mean, Alvin Kamara is going to be the guy in that backfield,
Yep.
and chances are he's going to finish with as many targets as some of the wide receivers games.
Yeah.
Which this game, you saw it and it hurt you. Mostly if you were a Chris Olave owner.
Mm-hmm.
My man finished with one catch on 5 targets, 4 yards. If you're not playing PPR, that is 0.4 points. If you are, it's 1.4. So either way, you're pissed off. But I mean, I said if Jameis was playing, I loved the Chris Olave start.
Yeah, and it
But if
really
was gonna
showed.
Yeah. If it was going to be Derek Carr with a hurt shoulder, you can't throw the ball down the field.
Mm-mm.
And Michael Thomas slant boy caught 4-6 for 53 yards. It gave you Michael Thomas week 9.3 points. And it's kind of what we said. It's why I said I liked starting Gabe Davis over Michael Thomas this week. I didn't expect Derek Carr to be in there with half of a shoulder, but they went ahead and did that anyways. I don't know if Juwan Johnson did something, but he's just a ghost.
Yeah.
And Taysom Hill is entirely a gadget player that I would not really consider starting at this point at all. He ran the ball 4 times for 10 yards. He got 1 pass for 7 yards, and he threw 1 pass for 13 yards.
Mm-hmm.
You're not. It's just you're doing all of this for 3.2 points.
Yeah.
And it's just not something I'm willing to. And they're just staying away from it.
Yeah.
So you know your guys. And Michael Thomas, you're kicking the tires on. Rashid Shaheed had 7 targets in this one, caught 3 of them for 33. Like we said, he's not a guy we're sticking too close to. Apparently, Derek Carr likes throwing the ball to him, so we'll see. But I'm not really rostering him right now.
Yeah.
That's really.
Yeah, and we said it, when Kamara comes back, it's his backfield. Tony Jones, Kendre Miller, irrelevant. Absolutely irrelevant. When Jamal comes back off IR, I think Jamal will get some rushes. But again, it'll still be Kamara leading that backfield. He's going to get all the targets out the backfield. Jamal will eat into some of the carries. But again, that's really not an issue if you're a Kamara owner. And if they keep rolling Derek Carr with that AC sprain, you're seeing the effect it can have. It was a division game. The Bucs came to play. But that is going to hurt Chris Olave owners especially. Again, we'll have to see. We'll monitor it as the week goes on. But yeah, if he's playing banged up like that, we saw the outcome of it.
Yeah, that's all I got for that one.
Yeah.
Move on to the next one.
Yeah, that'll take us to the Commanders. Traveled to Philadelphia, played the Eagles, gave them a ride, lost 34-31. Sam Howell had a very good bounce back week. He threw 29 of 41, 290 yards, a touchdown, 6 rushes for 40 yards, 19.6 fantasy points. Obviously, again, not someone we're considering starting, so I'm not going to harp on him too long. Brian Robinson is a guy that we are starting. He had 14 carries, 45 yards, a touchdown, 2 catches for 6 on 2 targets, 13.1 fantasy points. Played 55% of snaps, a solid week for him. And we said it, he was efficient against the Bills, wasn't out there too much because they were down so much. But he had a solid week, 13 fantasy points. I wouldn't be upset about it. Antonio Gibson, he's in the abyss. He's not going to be a relevant fantasy player unless Brian Robinson gets injured. And even then, I'd be hesitant to play him. So as of
might
now,
go Chris Rodriguez.
Exactly. So Antonio Gibson.
And they might just run the ball with Curtis Samuel.
Yeah. No, but really though. So he's not someone that should be on the roster. I'm not going to touch on him too long. Scary Terry. The whole receiving room actually had solid weeks. Scary Terry, 8 catches.
I said it, man. He always does good against the Eagles.
And he did again. Yeah, 8 catches, 86 yards, 10 targets. 22.6 fantasy points. He fell on the ball in the end zone off a Brian Robinson fumble. That helped his fantasy day. That helped get him up to that 22.6. They do not credit him with a receiving or a rushing touchdown, but they did give him the 6 fantasy points for a touchdown.
For a fumble recovery touchdown.
Yeah, fumble recovery touchdown. So, I mean, hey, Scary Terry
You get it
owners,
how you can get it.
yeah, exactly. And if you're a Brian Robinson
However you
owner,
get
you're kind of pissed. But
it.
hey,
Yeah.
that's how it
It
goes
is what it is.
sometimes. Curtis Samuel had a solid game, 7 catches, 51 yards on 8 targets. He also had a rush for a yard and a touchdown. He had 18.2 fantasy points. He's a weird one because he's probably not rostered in your league. And I don't necessarily know if he should be, but we'll probably touch more on him on the waiver wire in our next episode. Jahan Dotson had 4 catches for 27 yards and a touchdown on 9 targets. He had 12.7 fantasy points. He's someone we thought would take that leap into that number 2 spot. I've always thought Curtis Samuel is crazy talented, especially when Dotson wasn't there or he was injured and Terry would miss games. Curtis Samuel would show that he could, kind of hold some weight in that offense. But Terry's the number 1. I think the discussion for who could be the number 2 for the rest, at least fantasy-wise, for the rest of the year, there's a discussion to be had. That may be something, we discuss further. But Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel, not guys I feel comfortable enough giving them starts just yet until I see a bit more consistency there. And the last one, Logan Thomas, 3 catches, 41 yards, 3 targets, 7.3. For a tight end, it's a decent week. It's not terrible. He played 79% of the snaps. He's, their lead tight end there. The receivers really ate this week. Sam Howell showed he could get it done through the air, and they stayed competitive. But, I mean, not too much to say about Logan Thomas. He's right in that mid-pack with all those 10 to 20 ranked tight ends. Which one you should start each week? Flip a coin about it, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really got too much for them.
Yeah, and then that takes us to the Eagles side of the ball, and it's kind of what we've seen the past couple weeks. Jalen had another very solid week, 25 of 37, 319 yards, 2 touchdowns, 9 rushes for 34 yards, 24.16 fantasy points. Very solid week from Jalen. It's DeAndre Swift's backfield. The snaps percentages show it, the yards per carry, just everything. He had 14 carries, 56 yards, and a touchdown. 4 receptions on 4 targets for 23 yards, 17.9, so basically 18 fantasy points. Played 63% of the snaps. When he wasn't in, it was Gainwell, who has not looked very good of late. 4 carries, 14 yards, 2 catches for 7, 6.1 fantasy points. He's worth rostering if Swift gets hurt. I mean, he's worth a roster spot for sure. If Swift gets hurt, he's someone I would feel good about starting. But if Swift is in, I am not starting Gainwell. I'm not even considering it at this point. Ever since A.J. Brown yelled that he wanted more targets, he has gotten them. And this game was no different. He deserves the targets. He's showing it. He had 9 catches for 175 yards, 13 targets, caught 2 touchdowns, 38.5 fantasy points. An absolute monster week from A.J. Brown. And we actually saw Devonta Smith get some more action than he's been getting these past couple weeks. He caught 7 passes for 78 yards on 9 targets, 14.8 fantasy points. A very solid week for Devonta Smith owners, especially as we always say. No touchdowns scored, and you're scoring 14 plus fantasy points. That is very solid.
Yeah,
Dallas,
this was a week. This is what you like to see from the Eagles offense as an owner of, if you have DeAndre Swift, A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts, or Devontae Smith. It's like, if one guy has a big boom week, it doesn't mean the others are going to be irrelevant.
Yeah.
Like, that's what you love to see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And finishing out, Godare has looked not very good. He's kind of, it's weird. It's not that he's getting phased out of the offense because he was out there for every single offensive play, 100% of the snaps. But to get 4 targets and only catch 2 of them for 25 yards, 4.5 fantasy points, he's It's weird because he's like Kyle Pitts, but on a much better offense. It's like, why is
Yeah.
Godare not getting more volume? He just hasn't gotten it. I feel much more comfortable still starting him compared to Pitts. I'm Pitts, like we said, he's almost worth dropping. If, like we say
Yeah.
with a Kadarius Toney, guys like this, if Kyle Pitts next week gets 25 points on someone else's team, I would be like, okay, good for you, because he's going to give you 3 to 4 the next 5 weeks after that. Godare, I have a lot more hope for. I think, as the season progresses, he can start getting implemented more in. But through 4 weeks, what we've seen from him, I'm not too excited about at all.
Oh yeah, and I don't have anything else for that one. If
Yeah,
you're
it was
good, we'll move on.
yeah.
To LA, taking on Indy in Indianapolis. LA ended up winning in overtime, 23. Matt Stafford looked a little better in this one. Obviously, he threw for 319 and 1 touchdown. Had another interception. Threw 40 passes in this one, so you'd imagine the guy's got a lot of targets.
Mm-hmm.
Kyron Williams had another great game, another top RB finish. He ran the ball 25 times for 103 yards, 2 touchdowns, lost a fumble, but what the hell? Who cares? Because, I mean,
He's
the
getting
guy
all the
still
volume.
finishes. Yeah. And you saw Ronnie Rivers get 47 yards in this one, but he only played 28% of the snaps, so he's not really eating too much into Kyron Williams' workload.
Mm-hmm.
He's an every week starter. If you're rolling him, that is that. He also caught 3 passes for 24 yards, so you
Very
gotta love
nice.
it. Moving on to the wide receivers, Puka Nacua, 9 catches on 10 targets, 163 and a touchdown. I mean, this is what you paid all the fab for. This is what you used your priority for. Cooper Kupp is supposed to be practicing this week. I don't think that will relegate him to a useless, spot in fantasy, but he's
Mm-hmm.
going to be probably like a high-end wide receiver too at that point.
Yeah.
You saw Van Jefferson, 3 targets, 2 catches, 29 yards.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to get out of Van Jefferson. Not even looking at starting or rostering him.
No.
Someone I'm more interested in who didn't have too great of a week but still finished okay was Tutu Atwell. He got 9 targets, which you love to see. They caught 5 of them, 24 yards. So he only finished with 7.4 fantasy points if you're playing in PPR. If not, then yeah, it's only 2.4. But other than that, the only guy I'm interested in right now in this Rams offense with Cooper Kupp coming back is Tyler Higbee. Just inked his new deal, turns around, gets 11 targets, only catches 5 of them, but for 64 yards. That's going to give you 11.4 PPR points, and in this, like we say, this tight end wasteland, 11.4 points is probably going to be better than the next guys outside of Mark Andrews and Cole Kmet this week.
Yeah.
So
And really quick, when if Cooper Kupp does come back, Stafford's fantasy value goes up. It definitely
yeah,
goes up. And then the Rams are easy. They have very obvious starts. Kyron Williams, Cooper Kupp if he's back, Puka Nacua, Tutu Atwell if Cooper Kupp comes back. I'm keeping rostered, but I probably wouldn't start him. And Tyler Higbee is looking like, especially after the new deal, he looks like a guy you could think about starting as well.
yeah. And then with that, we're gonna move on to the Colts side of the ball. Anthony Richardson, came back from the concussion, had a great day. He was only 11 for 25, but for 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Ran the ball 10 times for 56 and a touchdown. Finished 25.6 fantasy points. So, he's one of those ones that I'm honestly, if I have him, depending on what other quarterback I have, I'm starting Anthony Richardson pretty much every week.
Mm-hmm.
Zach Moss, you saw he got 18 carries this week, which is still nice to see for a running back. But with Anthony Richardson being back, those, that 28 carries, 10 of them went to Richardson. And Moss got 70 yards on the ground. He still managed to do nothing in the passing game this time. So, yeah, I mean, You didn't have too big of a day out of Zach Moss.
No.
And as that's kind of, to me, more along the lines of what you can expect with Anthony Richardson being healthy in this offense.
Yeah.
Because that's just the reality of it. And the receivers, you were disappointed no matter who you had.
Yeah.
The lead receiver was Alec Ogletree,
It's disgusting.
a tight end.
Mm-hmm.
Not even Mo Alley Cox, not Kylan Granston, which, by the way, there are 3 tight ends who got targets and catches on the Colts. So, I mean, with Anthony Richardson only completing 11 passes, you can imagine everybody had a pretty poor day.
Yeah.
Alec Pierce, 1 catch on 2 targets for 38 yards. Josh Downs, you saw get 3 targets, caught 2 of them for 34. So Josh Downs is still a guy that I'm pretty interested in. He's very talented, and as Anthony Richardson continues to grow as a passer, he's going to be an available option. And I think this Colts offense, especially if they don't trade away Jonathan Taylor, has a chance at being very good.
Mm-hmm.
But, other than that, Michael Pittman, like I said, it wasn't a good day for any pass catcher there. He caught 1 pass for 15 yards, and I think he caught a 2-point conversion. So that's about it. And, the Colts, I like as long as Anthony Richardson is healthy, but we did see if he were to go out that Gardner Minshew is able to provide for the receivers fantasy-wise. And, yeah, unless you have anything else.
No, I mean, the Colts the same as the Rams fantasy-wise. You have obvious starters. You're starting Michael Pittman. Anthony Richardson is very interesting because his rushing upside. I don't hate you if you're starting him. If Jonathan Taylor comes back, you're immediately starting him. If he continues to not play, Zach Moss, I don't hate that start either. Has a rough game, but he has been very productive. If JT does come back, Zach Moss immediately fades into darkness. So honestly, if you're a believer that JT is coming back, and you have Zach Moss, I would have already tried to move him. It might be too late now, especially with reports that JT could be returning. That's really it.
Yeah, and we're going to take a break, guys. This is going to be the part 1 of the episode. We're going to come back in a few minutes with part 2. So we'll see you guys then.
Until next time.